You wake up and it's already there. Not tiredness exactly, something flatter than that. A kind of blankness where the drive to do things used to be. You look at the day ahead and nothing in it pulls at you the way it should. Not the things you're supposed to want, not even the things you actually used to want. They're all just there, waiting, requiring something from you that you don't currently have access to. And the strangest part isn't the feeling itself. It's that you can't trace it back to anything. Nothing catastrophic happened. You're not in crisis. You slept. You have things in your life that are genuinely good. By any reasonable measure, there is no shortage of reasons to feel motivated. And yet, the motivation isn't there. And the gap between what should be generating it and what you actually feel has been quietly widening for longer than you've wanted to acknowledge. So you do what most people do. You look for the reason in the obvious places. You're not exercising enough. You need a new goal. You've been too comfortable. You need to discipline yourself back into momentum. And maybe you try one of those things, and it works for a few days, and then the flatness returns. And now there's a new layer on top of it. The specific discouragement of having tried something that should have worked and finding yourself exactly where you started. Here's what none of those explanations account for. The hidden cause, the one this video is actually about, is not in your habits, your goals, or your discipline. It's in your nervous system. And until you understand what's happening there, everything you try to fix the problem with is working on the wrong level entirely. What motivation actually is, and where it lives. Before the hidden cause makes sense, the mechanism of motivation itself needs to be precise. Because the popular understanding of motivation, that it's a feeling you either have or don't have, that it arrives when conditions are right and disappears when they're not, is incomplete in a way that directly causes people to misdiagnose their own situation. Motivation is not a feeling. It is a neurochemical process. Specifically, it is the product of a brain system built around dopamine. But not dopamine in the way it's usually described. The common version of the dopamine story is that dopamine is the pleasure chemical. You do something enjoyable, no dopamine releases. You feel good, but that's not quite right. And the distinction matters enormously. What dopamine actually governs is not pleasure. It governs anticipation, the felt sense of wanting, the pull toward a future outcome, the internal signal that says this is worth moving toward, is dopamine's actual function. You don't get a dopamine hit when you receive the reward. You get it when you anticipate the reward. It is the neurochemical of forward momentum, of meaning attached to effort, of the future feeling worth moving toward. When the dopamine system is functioning well, motivation feels automatic. You want things. Effort feels purposeful. The future holds something that generates genuine pull. When the dopamine system is dysregulated, when it's depleted, blunted, or misfiring, none of that is available. Not because you've lost the will to try, because the neurochemical substrate that generates the felt sense of wanting has stopped producing it reliably. That is not a character problem. It is a biological one, and it has specific, identifiable causes. If this is landing at a different level than the usual conversation about motivation, hit the like button. Because the cause we're about to get into is the one that changes what you actually do about this. The hidden cause nobody is talking about. Here is the thing that most content about motivation and most general wellness advice consistently misses. The single most common hidden driver of chronic motivational flatness in otherwise healthy, functioning adults is not depression, not burnout in the classic sense, not a lack of goals or purpose. It is chronic low-grade stress that has been running long enough to dysregulate the dopamine system without ever reaching the level of obvious crisis. Not the acute stress of a deadline or a difficult conversation. Not the dramatic stress of a genuine emergency. The quiet, persistent, low-ceiling stress of a life that is continuously demanding without ever fully releasing. The kind where there is always something to manage, always something pending, always a background layer of unresolved obligation or low-level threat that never quite rises to the level of emergency, but also never fully quiets. That kind of stress, sustained over months, sometimes years, does something specific and measurable to the brain's motivational architecture. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, when chronically elevated, directly suppresses dopamine production and dopamine receptor sensitivity. The brain running in long-term threat management mode downregulates the forward-looking, reward-anticipating system because that system is metabolically expensive and non-essential to immediate survival. Why allocate resources to wanting the future when the present keeps requiring all available energy just to be navigated? The result is a person who is not depressed in the clinical sense, who is not in crisis, who is, by external measures, managing fine, but who has lost access to the felt sense of wanting, whose relationship with the future has gone flat, whose motivation for work, for creativity, for relationships, for things they genuinely value, has not disappeared but has gone quiet in a way that looks from the inside, unlike laziness or apathy or loss of purpose. It is none of those things. It is a stressed nervous system that has been running on cortisol long enough to borrow against the dopamine system to pay for it. And the most important implication of that fact is this: the solution is not to find better goals or try harder or discipline yourself back into momentum. The solution is to reduce the chronic stress load in a way that allows the dopamine system to recover. Everything else is working around the actual problem, rather than addressing it. Why you can't just push through it? This is the part worth sitting with. Because the instinct, when motivation disappears, is to treat it as a discipline problem, to override it, to commit more firmly, to stop making excuses, and simply do the thing. And that instinct is understandable. Because from the outside, and often from the inside, motivational flatness looks like a choice. Like something you're doing or not doing. Like something effort could correct. But here's what pushing through actually does to a nervous system already running on chronic stress. It adds another layer of demand on top of the existing load. It signals to the threat system that the current pace needs to continue and possibly increase. It elevates cortisol further. And elevated cortisol suppresses dopamine further, which makes motivation harder to access the next day than it was today. This is the exhausting loop that people in chronic motivational flatness often describe without being able to name it. You try harder. It works briefly, through willpower alone. Then it stops working. You try harder again, or it stops working sooner. Eventually, the effort required to produce the same output becomes unsustainable, and the conclusion most people draw is that something is wrong with them. When what's actually happening is that the strategy was always making the underlying problem worse. Save this video. Because what comes next is what actually works, and more specifically, why it works at the level where the problem actually lives. This is the framework worth returning to. What actually addresses it? The intervention that research in neuroscience and stress physiology consistently supports for dopamine system recovery is not a productivity strategy. It is deliberate, protected, genuine recovery, specifically the kind that signals safety to the nervous system rather than just absence of activity. There is a crucial distinction here that most people miss. Passive rest, lying on the couch, scrolling, watching something that requires nothing, does not reliably reduce cortisol. It pauses demand, but it does not actively signal the threat system that the environment is safe. The nervous system, in passive rest, often continues running background stress processing. The cortisol level drops slightly, but remains elevated. The dopamine system does not recover. What does signal safety? Measurably, physiologically, is engagement in activities that generate intrinsic reward without external performance demand. Activities you do because they are inherently absorbing, not because they produce anything or meet anyone's expectations. Creative engagement, physical movement in a non-competitive context, time in natural environments, deep, unhurried conversation with people who require nothing from you. These activities activate the dopamine system through genuine reward, the kind that is not contingent on outcome or evaluation, and that activation begins to restore the system's baseline sensitivity. This is why the things that used to motivate you feel inaccessible right now, not because you've outgrown them, because the system that generates the pull toward them has been suppressed, and the path back is not through discipline applied to those things. It is through the recovery of the system itself, through deliberate engagement with what restores it, protected from the demand cycle long enough to actually work. Here is the insight that tends to reframe everything, and the one most worth carrying past this video. The motivational flatness you've been experiencing is not evidence that you've lost your drive, your ambition, or your connection to the things you care about. It is evidence that you have been giving for longer than you have been replenishing. The drive is still there. The caring is still there. What's depleted is the neurochemical substrate they run on. And substrates recover when given what they need, not when given more of what depleted them. That reframe matters because it changes the relationship you have with the flatness from self-accusation to something more like accurate diagnosis. An accurate diagnosis is where appropriate treatment begins. The people worth sending this to are the ones you've watched try harder and harder at the same thing and get less and less back from it. The ones who keep concluding the problem is their attitude or their commitment. The ones for whom this specific reframe, from discipline problem to nervous system problem, would change everything about what they try next. The longer project underneath it. The dopamine system recovery we've described addresses the immediate hidden cause. But underneath that cause, for many people, is a longer-standing pattern worth understanding. The specific set of conditions that produced the chronic stress load in the first place. The difficulty saying no. The background sense that stopping is not allowed. The identity that is so thoroughly built around productivity and output that rest feels like failure, and recovery feels like falling behind. That pattern has a history. It was formed somewhere in some context, for reasons that made complete sense at the time. And understanding it, not just managing its symptoms, is what changes the relationship with motivation at the level that actually sticks. Not just recovering it this time. Building the kind of life architecture that stops depleting it faster than it can restore. There is a video on this channel that goes directly into the psychological roots of why high-functioning people run their systems past the point of depletion, where that drive comes from, what it's protecting, and what a genuinely sustainable relationship with effort and output actually looks like. That is the next layer of this conversation. And if today named something you've been trying to solve by working harder at the wrong thing, that follow-through is where the real shift lives. If the motivational flatness has been significant and sustained, if it's affecting your work, your relationships, your sense of yourself, please speak with a mental health or medical professional. What we've described today is real, measurable, and responds to the right kind of support. You don't have to keep pushing through something that has a different solution entirely. Drop a comment with how long the flatness has been there. Not what caused it, just how long. Because that number across all the people watching this tells a story about how normalized chronic depletion has become. And seeing that story collectively changes something about how isolated the experience feels individually. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.